Hello everyone and welcome to another Sony Creative Software live webinar. I'm Gary Rubholz. Today we're going to talk about the NewBlue Titler Pro that comes included free with Vegas Pro 11. And we're pretty excited about this titler because it's a powerful, robust tool that gives you the ability to do all kinds of really cool things with your titles in your Vegas Pro projects. Now, I'm going to go through in quite a bit of detail the features of the NewBlue Titler Pro, and I'm going to create something that may or may not be graphically high top quality graphics, but what I want to do instead of try to wow you with my graphics is to show you the tools and show how you can use the tools along with your own design sense to create good graphics. As usual, we'll set aside about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer some of your questions. So go ahead and fire off your questions via the chat window, and we'll get to as many of those as we can when we're done. All right, so let's get started. Let's take a look at the computer screen here. So as I said, I want to get fairly detailed, but of course we're going to start with some basic concepts, just give you the lay of the land with the Titler Pro, and show you where everything is, and just kind of lay the groundwork for getting started using it. So we'll look at the concept of a paragraph, how to use the paragraph, how to use the timeline at the bottom of the Titler Pro. We'll also look at editing the paragraph box, editing the text, and then editing individual elements within the paragraph box. From there we'll move to attributes on the object settings, style settings, and then all of the tools that are in the library. So we've got a lot to cover here, and I think you'll find that the NewBlue Titler Pro really brings a new dimension, if you will, to your editing projects in Vegas Pro. So let's switch over to Vegas Pro 11. I've just got a simple project set up here, and if I play this for you, you'll see that it's just some waves crashing in on the beach in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And what we're going to do is just put a little bit of text over the top of that. So the NewBlue Titler Pro shows up in Vegas Pro 11 as a media generator, along with the other media generators in Vegas Pro. Just select NewBlue Titler Pro from the menu, from the list of the media generators window, and then drag the preset into your project. Okay, it opens up the interface, and let me zoom in on this a little bit so that you get a better look at what we're dealing with here. And in many ways, it works just like any other media generator in Vegas Pro, in that it opens up in the media generator window, has some similarities, and then of course it has its own attributes within the media generator, the media generator's window. So when you first open it up and you first add the default preset, this is what it looks like. You've got a piece of text here on the front, and a bunch of windows here, and we're going to go through each of these and show you how they show you how it all comes together. The first thing that you could do, and if you want to get something other than the basic white text that I have on my screen right now, is you can take a look at the styles. The NewBlue Titler Pro comes with several styles out of the box, and click the Styles button, and you see all the styles listed on the left side here. And as I hover over them, you can see that my text changes to show what it would look like if I chose that style. So I just hover over one to see what it looks like. Now, a couple of things to notice here. Some of these are fairly plain. So here's a basic text preset. Some of them are a little fancier. They have some sort of texture in them. And some of them are even fancier yet. If you look at this one, you can see that there's some extrusion in the background of the text, and all of these things are doable within the NewBlue Titler Pro, and we're going to take a look at those. So if I want to choose one of these, I'll just choose a real obvious one here. Actually, I won't choose one now. What I want to do instead is talk about the concept of a paragraph. When we drop this on here, you can see that I have a text box. NewBlue Titler Pro calls this text box a paragraph. And if you look in the timeline below, and I'll zoom out so we can see the whole timeline, all 10 seconds of it, you can see that there is a paragraph here called Enter Text, which is what matches the text in my preview window. So If I have these, so let me back up a second. You can add more than one paragraph to the same generator. So for instance, if I wanted to have two separate pieces of text here, I could click the Add Paragraph button. When I do that, I get another one down here. So I have two paragraphs and basically two text boxes. Now right now they're one right on top of the other. So let me go change the style of one of them so it's real obvious which one we're looking at. So let's just take this orange one here. So there you can see in the preview up here that I've got two text boxes, or two paragraphs. They both happen to be called Enter Text because that's what the text says. But I've changed the style so you can see them differently. Let's, down in the timeline here, if you have more than one box of text, you can reorder them in order to get the one that you want. So get the layering you want. So very much like the layers, track layers in Vegas Pro, if I drag one on top of the other, it becomes the top layer. So now you can see that I've layered it so that the orange text is on top of the white text. And if I want the white text on top, I can just reorder them again, and now the white text is on top. Now if I have the white text on top and I want to edit the orange text, I might have a little bit of a problem because I can't select the orange text by clicking on the box. But I can always select it by clicking on the paragraph below. So now I can change that to different text. Okay, and if I decide I don't want that second paragraph, I can either just select it up here and delete it, or I can right-click the paragraph bar in the timeline and choose Delete Paragraph. So I've changed to a different text font. I can change the size, all the things that the basic things you normally want to do with text in a word processor, we can do here. You've got some tracking tools, so if I want to add space between the letters, I can just use those. I've got some line spacing or leading tools. If I had two lines of text, I could add space in between those lines of text. So very basic tools that you can work with. And what I want you to notice is that right now my text box or my paragraph has a green dotted line around it, a green hashed line around it. And this indicates that I've basically entered editing mode for the box itself. When I have that green dotted line, I can change the parameters of the text box itself, of the paragraph itself. And I've got a couple of buttons over here that I can use to change a couple of things. First of all, if I want to move it, I can just grab the green box and move it to where I want to move it. Okay, now notice that when I move it and put it where I want, over in the Object tab, over in the Attributes, the Object Parameters over in the Attributes tab, the position settings have changed. And if I want to change those back, I could just type 0, double-click to select the current value, type 0, and I'm back to 0 to my default settings. So I can move it manually, or I can move it by the numbers with the position settings. Also, these buttons over here, if I click the top one, this enables me to rotate in a traditional 2D rotation around the Z-axis. And again, you notice that as I do that, the Z rotation field over in the properties area here updates to show. And again, I can set it back to 0 to set it back to its default. The other button over here is a three-dimensional rotation tool. So when I click that, I get this circle around the text to indicate that I'm now in 3D rotation mode. And let me just sort of spend a second here to show you how this works, help you get used to it. It does take some getting used to because you're rotating in 3 dimensions, and it isn't always totally obvious how it works. But a couple of tricks that I've picked up here, if you click this circle itself and drag along the circle, you're basically editing, rotating in the along the Z-axis, right? So just rotation like a clock would rotate. If I click the circle and move straight down, I'm now editing in the X, around the X-axis. So I'm tipping the text over or bringing it forward. If I start at the left or the right and move straight across to the middle, I'm rotating around the y-axis. So I can rotate around all three axes. And if I hit the middle of the circle or somewhere within the circle and just start moving around, you can see that I can do all of them at the same time. And as I said, this does take some getting used to get the exact settings you want. And in fact, I kind of prefer myself to use the rotation tools in the properties area. So I'm going to set those all back to 0 just so you can see how I would do this if I actually wanted to rotate it by the numbers. And as we move along here, I'll do that a little bit more so you can see how it works. So once I've done all that rotation, I can click away and I enter back into the paragraph editing mode. Okay, so that's how we can edit the paragraph. Now if I want to edit the text, just like you might expect, I double click it to select it, and then I can type what I want to type. Okay, so very straightforward and easy there. But one thing that's cool about this, when I double click this, notice that all of a sudden it looks like I have double controls on the edge of the box. And when you've selected the whole text inside a box, that doesn't really buy you much of anything. But what it does buy you is when you select just one letter. So if I go in and select just the R, you can see now that I have those separate controls, and now those rotational tools that I was using before are affecting just the R. So if I turn those on and start manipulating it, I can fiddle with just the R. So again, let me set that back to 0. So this opens up a lot of really cool possibilities. So for instance, if I wanted to take this Rio Waves text that I have here, and maybe I'm going to put together an opening title sequence for a show called Rio Waves or something. Now I will warn you beforehand that what I'm about to do isn't necessarily in the best of taste as far as good graphics go, but it will show you some of the capabilities of the titler, and you, using your professional good taste, can do a much better job making nice, tasteful titles than what I might do here. But I will show you how these tools work. So I've got the R selected, and what I can do now is to resize just the R. So maybe I'll take the R, make it a little bit bigger, and drop it into place there. I'll go about 2.5 and drop it into place. Then I can use my cursor and hold down the Shift key to select the W. Now I want the W to match in size with the R, so I looked over here when I was doing it before, and I noticed that I'd set it to 2.5. So I'll just type in 2.5 here in all three X, Y, and Z. And now the W matches the size of the R. Obviously it's kind of in the way, so I'll move it over and maybe drop it down. And you can see that in this way I'm selecting different parts of the text and just moving them differently. And fairly quickly I've taken a plain piece of text and created something that might look like a logo for the TV show or whatever it is you're working on. And the ability to click in and select just separate portions of the text and work with them, work with the properties individually, really gives me a lot of flexibility for creating interesting text. Okay. Now we've been sort of talking about, I've been jumping back and forth between this area over here where graphically I've been working and the attributes tab. And we've already talked about several of the attributes on the object portion here, where you saw things were being updated as I was moving the text box in the graphical portion. But another thing that the object tab, the object controls give us is keyframing. So just like in other parts of Vegas Pro, you might want to set separate keyframes up to animate your text or have things move around. And I can do the same thing here in the Titler Pro. So what I'm going to do is to turn on keyframing. Now you might notice that if your media generator's box is small enough, you don't see that keyframing control. So just make your box a little bit bigger and you'll reveal the turn on keyframing checkbox. So I'm going to go ahead and select that to turn keyframing on. And then at this first keyframe, let's just make the text quite small. And if you look over my video preview window, you can see that's very small back there. And then at about 4 seconds, I'm going to make it bigger. Now, just like in other parts of Vegas Pro, if I reposition my cursor and then make a change, it'll drop a keyframe. I could, if I want to, scroll down and add a keyframe manually here if I want to. There we go. So now I've got 2 keyframes. And at the second keyframe, I'm going to just make the text bigger so it comes out. And then maybe I want a third keyframe. And at this keyframe, let's say we want to add a little bit of rotation to this thing. So I'm going to take the X rotation, and as I said, I prefer to work with the numbers over here. Just seems to give me a little bit more control. And as long as I'm going to be here, let's talk about how you can control the settings using these tools over here. There's several different ways you can change the settings of these fields. One way I've already used and shown you a couple of times is to double-click it, the current value, and type in a new value. Okay, that's one way. I use that way quite frequently. Another way is you've got the up and down arrows over here, and these enable you to really tweak it in small settings. So I'm going 1/10 of a 1/10 of a point each time I click the arrow. A third way would be to just click inside at any portion of the field, and it'll set it to match the setting that you clicked on. And the fourth way, and this way is probably the way I use maybe equally as much as just selecting the text, is to just use this text area as a control. If you click and drag within it, it just acts as a slider or a control. So I'm going to tip this over a little bit in the x-axis, then I'll rotate it in the y-axis, and then also in the z-axis to kind of set it where I want it. Okay, now I'm going to make it bigger and move it around a little bit. So I'm just positioning it where I want to position. Okay, so the object area of the Attributes tab gives me a lot of control over the look of the text as far as the box itself. And if I play this, I can preview it using these tools here in the titler itself. And here's the keyframing that I created. It zooms in, gets a little bit bigger, twists and rotates, and ends up. Okay, so I can use those. I can also, of course, anytime I want to in the video preview window, click play, and you can see it working in the video preview window. Now, I don't have the entire video preview window in our current view, but you can see enough of it to see that it's working. Okay. All right, so that's the object area. Now, we've also got an area called the style area. And let's see what the style area is all about. I've gone to the second keyframe here just so that you can see the text large in the preview here. And I'll go to the style. And there are several style settings that we're going to work with. Now, by default, when you first add the preset, it adds a 3D face. And that's one of several different types of objects that you can use in this text. Now on this 3D, and we'll take a look at those in a moment. On the 3D face setting, I can do things like change the color of the text. So if I want text that maybe matches my scene a little bit better, I'll just drop that in, and now my text is blue. Now here's kind of a cool thing about the rotation that we put on here. Notice that I've chosen blue in my preview window, but in my video preview window, in the Vegas video preview window, it doesn't look as dark. And why is that? Well, let me play it once, and hopefully you'll see what happens here. In Vegas, it starts out blue, and then it hits the rotation. When it hits the the X rotation, we start getting a reflection off of an imaginary light that sits above the text. So when it tips over in the, not the Y, but the X rotation, the light hits it differently. And so it changes, puts more light onto the color. And just you know, makes it look a little more realistic, like it would look if you were turning something under a light in a room. So that's a pretty cool effect when you have X rotation like we do here. Now, if we want something other than just a solid color, we could put a gradient on here. So maybe I want it to go from black to blue to black. And you've got two gradient points, and they can be moved around and adjusted however you want to give them the look that they want. Maybe instead of black, I'm just going to click on the one that I made black, and make it light blue so it's a little more visible in the preview for you. Now, what I want you to notice here is that I've got this blend from dark blue to light blue, and sure enough, if you look at the text, you see it blends from dark blue up in the upper left-hand corner to light blue in the lower right-hand corner. And what you should notice is that it does the same thing to every individual character in the text. So each one of them has its own blend. And in some cases, you might want exactly that. But in other cases, you might want the blend to start up here at the upper left of the R and end in the lower left of the S. And you can do that by clicking the Stretch to Paragraph checkbox. So when I click that, you can now see that the blend starts here and ends down here. So just a couple of different ways you can treat the gradient blend across that text. I'll go ahead and turn that off so each one has its own individual blend again. Okay, so if you don't get what you want from the color or the gradient selections, you can add a texture to your text. So I'm going to select the texture text box and click the texture field. And this brings up a Choose Image dialog box, and right now I'm looking at all the default images that ship with the NewBlue, that install with the NewBlue Titler Pro. And I can choose any one of these to add to my text. So let's just take a couple of different samples here. So I'm going to choose this one and open it. And you can see that each one of my letters has that sort of crosshash pattern from that texture. Now again, if I don't want each one to have the same pattern in it, but I want to stretch it across the whole paragraph, I can do that with this too, and you can see that I now have a completely different look. So there's a lot of different ways to give yourself some different looks here just by adding textures and stretching to fill across the paragraph and so forth. And I'll get to this environment map selection in just a moment. But for right now, this doesn't really go with our text, our video so well. So let's take this one that's a graphic of some water droplets. And if you look in the video preview window, okay, so now we got water droplets on and a water scene in the background. So that makes some sense. Okay, so that's how you can control the color of the text and the texture of the text. Where things really start getting interesting then with the 3D face is that we can control different aspects of this text. And one of the things I can do is I can add extrusion. So if I start adding some extrusion on here, I'll just go crazy with it and go all the way. You can see the depth of the letters, and in the video preview window over here, you can see them as well. And if I play this in the video preview window, you can see that extrusion is there and shows up there. Okay, now that might be a little extreme to have quite that much extrusion on it, so I can choose something a little more manageable here, a little more realistic, or not realistic, but a little more subtle, let's say, and just put a little bit of depth to it. Okay, so now let's go to this third keyframe here so you can see it here as well. What I want you to notice when I add extrusion to the face is that the face has the same texture that I gave, or the extrusion has the same texture that I gave the face. So if you can kind of see, these droplets on top have just been sort of extruded out and are now present on the extrusion as well. That might be cool. You might want to do that. But you might not want to do that. And in fact, I usually save extrusion on a face for more special effect kind of thing, or to solve a particular problem, and I'll show you that in a moment. But if I just want extrusion on this, I'm probably not going to use the extrusion on the face itself, because it doesn't give me a lot of control. I can get more control by adding a 3D outline. Okay, so if my style settings up here, I have several 2D and 3D settings. I can add a face or an outline. And in fact, I can add as many faces and outlines as I want to. So let me go ahead and add an outline. And you can see that when you add a 3D outline, it already has some extrusion, and it comes in with a nice bright red, which may seem ridiculous, but actually I really like that it comes with such a vibrant color, because now I can see exactly what it looks like in my preview window. And then I can adjust my extrusion to taste. So maybe, I guess I'll leave it at 1 for now, which was the default. And then I can go and use the same color pickers that I did before to either add change the color, add a gradient, or add a texture. And the neat thing about this is, let's say I add, I'll just add this star texture to it, is that now you can see that my texture on my extrusion is totally different than the texture on my face. And that can give you more flexibility and come in handy. Now, I've found for this presentation that it actually does work better for the presentation just to use the same that I used on the face. So I'm going to select that. Now, what's cool about doing this with a separate 3D outline instead of just using the extrusion on the face, well, there are a couple of different things that are cool. First thing that's cool is if I choose this environment map checkbox that we ignored before, it's going to change the look of my extrusion. What the environment map basically does is says, okay, treat my extrusion or my face, whatever you're applying it to, but in this case I'm applying it to an extrusion, treat the extrusion as if it was a mirror, and then treat the texture that I've put on the extrusion as if that texture was applied to the walls around the mirror, around the room that the mirror sits in. So when I choose environment map, what I'm seeing is a reflection of that map, not the actual map. A couple reasons this is cool. First of all, you can see it's changed the look of the extrusion already and given it a pretty cool look. But what's really neat about this is now that it's reflecting off the imaginary walls that hold the texture, when I preview this, watch what happens when it starts rotating. It starts adding some dynamic movement in it because those reflections are changing as the angle of the text changes. So now my extrusion has a dynamic texture to it. And I could do the same thing with the face if I wanted to, but I'm going to leave the face basically where it is. Okay, so that's what the environment map feature is all about. The other neat thing about these 3D faces and outlines, and the other reason I like to use a 3D outline to make my extrusion instead of the extrusion of the face, is that I can now control the layer depth of that extrusion. So if you look right along the ridge where the extrusion meets the face, you can see that the face looks like it's out, like it juts out a little bit, like it's a raised lettering kind of a look. And that's because I can set the layer depth to different levels for both of these. So if I go back to the 3D face, I can see that my layer depth is set to 0. On my 3D outline, the layer depth is set to -1. If I make that even deeper, you can see that I can pull the extrusion quite far away from the face itself. Now, maybe I want to take that raised letter look and make it look like an old typeface or something, like an old lead type slug. So I'll bring the extrusion off the face a little bit, and I'm going to make the extrusion a little bit thicker. And then, now here's where a case where I might want to use the extrusion for the face. Now if I extrude the face down, you can see that my text now has a real raised look to it. And that's a pretty cool effect. Now I can go the other way with my outline as well, with my 3D outline as well. If I make the layer depth higher than the face, let me take that thickness off just to, let's set it to 1. If I make that higher than my face, make the layer depth higher, watch what happens. The extrusion starts to pull out, and now it looks like the face is recessed. So if I want to just maybe put a classy little ridge on that text, I can do that using the layer depth of the outline. So pretty cool. And all of this stuff, of course, if I preview this, all of this stuff follows along with the animation. So here it comes, and it starts to rotate, and as it rotates, you see the extrusions, and you see the little ridge on the top of the face, and kind of a neat effect. And of course, the same thing, if I play it in the video preview window, you'll see it over there as well. Okay, so that's kind of fun. Now, you can, as I mentioned earlier, you can add these style settings, both the 2D and the 3D. And as I did here, I added a 3D outline. Well, maybe I want another 3D outline. Okay, just choose it again, and there I have another one. Why might I want to do that? Well, I might want to start building some sort of an effect on this text. So let's say this extrusion is way too deep. Let's make it maybe just 0.5. Actually, let's make it 0.25. Okay, and now if I play around with that layer depth again, notice what I can do. I can put a little ridge around on the inside of that extrusion. Maybe I'll make it a little thicker so it sticks out a little bit more. And I probably don't want it to be red, so let's make it blue. Okay, so you can see how I can start fashioning pretty neat looking 3D text here by adding different faces and so forth. I can also add some roundness to this, so if I don't want that to be, that extrusion, that particular extrusion that I just added to be quite so square, notice the square corners, I can add some roundness to it, and now it has more round corners. Okay, I can also add to this text, even though we started this text out in 3D, I can add 2D elements to it. Now, with 2D, you've got three choices. You've got shadow, outline, and face. So if I want to add, let's say I want to add a 2D face to this. Okay, it's white and we don't see anything. Well, I know that's because it gave it a layer depth that's pretty low. It usually puts the layer below the existing layers. So I want to bring that out. If I bring it out far enough, you can see that I have now a 2D face that I can float above, or if I take it far enough back, I can float it behind. Okay, so let's just say I float it above a little bit. Now with 2D faces and shadows and outlines, you don't have an extrusion option, but you do have a blur option. So if I wanted to blur this a little bit, I can give it a different kind of a look. So again, it's all just about adding these elements and fiddling with them until you're sort of happy with the way they look. Let me take the blur off and show you the other thing that 2D elements give you that you don't have with the 3D is that you can add an effect. So if I click the Add an Effect button, I've got a bunch of effects that are included in the starter pack. And let's just take this shear energy set here. And if I move this off, let's see. Move this off, we can see, let's try the apparition one. So when I hover over it, you can see that it does some different things to the text. Right? It's just adding an effect to that face. Okay, so let's apply the apparition to it for a second. Now when I've added an effect like I have here, I've got all kinds of controls down here with which I can control the effect. So if I wanted to move it around a little bit differently and create a different look to it, I can do all that. I can change the angle and so forth. The point is I can add these things and just start adding effects to the 2D elements to create some pretty cool looks. Let's just add another 2D element real quick just to see what we can do here. Let's add a 2D outline. Okay, it's red. You can kind of see it poking out in a couple of places down there. If I make it a little bit thicker, there you can see it. Again, I've got the layer depth control that I can use. So I'm going to push it back to the background a little bit. Now look over in the video preview window here to see the effect that I'm going to create here. Maybe I don't want it to be red, but black. And then I can blur it to create kind of a shadowed outline effect. I can add that roundness that we were talking about earlier to soften up the edges and so forth. So, as I said earlier, this maybe isn't the classiest looking piece of artwork that I've created here, but you can see the potential for creating custom text that really sets your project apart from just plain ordinary white text. Now if I decide I don't want some of these elements like this 2D outline, I can just click the little trash can and get rid of it. I'll get rid of the 2D face, and there we're left sort of with our logo that we had created. And if I play this in the video preview window, you can see it come forward. Okay. We're coming up on, I got about 5 minutes before I want to get to the question and answer session here. So let's take a look real quickly at a couple of the other things that you have available here. Now, all the things that I've shown you, obviously, we've done it manually, and we can do all these things manually. And they do take some time to get used to and to get to learn how to use. And hopefully what I've shown you will help you to learn, help you get along down the road to learning it. But a great way to learn how these things work is to apply some of the styles or some of the presets that are included with NewBlue Titler Pro, and then take a look at how they've created them. So we've talked about the Object and the Style tab. If I go to the Effects tab, you see there's nothing there, and there's nothing on the Transitions tab. Well, what we can do is add effects and transitions and start building these things out. So I'm going to close this piece. I'm going to get a new text generator here. I'm going to park it above a different section of my project so we can kind of start from scratch. Earlier you saw that I could choose styles, and one great way of finding out how all those different faces and outlines and shadows and so forth, how they work, is to go and choose a style. So for instance, let's choose this preset right here, the spider preset. Now if you look over here, it's kind of hard to tell, but in the video preview window you can see that there's some effect stuff going on here. So how did they do this? How could I create that kind of look myself? Well, now that I've added that style, I can go to the style area and I can see exactly what the designer of this preset did. He has a 2D face, he has a 3D outline, another 3D outline. As I scroll down here, here's a 2D outline, and that 2D outline has an effect, the shear energy effect, and with these settings. So I can apply a style to text and then go to the style area and find out exactly the settings that were used to create that style. And if I want to experiment then with those settings on my own, I can say, well, what would happen if I change the layer depth to this particular item? Okay, well, there's something going on there. It's kind of hard to see in this case because it's 2D, but what if I change the width of it? What does that do? Okay, so you can see that just by going in and changing the parameters here, I can get an idea of how this thing was constructed and how these tools work. So that's the first piece of advice that I have for when you're trying to really get a handle on this, is just add a style and go and dissect it, deconstruct it to see how it was put together. Now when you go to the styles when you click the Styles button, what kind of has been happening, and I haven't been mentioning, is that you switch from the Attributes tab to the Library tab. And here on the Library tab, you have all kinds of different options. Styles is one of them, and that's what we've been looking at, the styles. If I have the default styles that I have here, I can use those. And I'm just going to set that back to no style, so it's back to its default. I've also got effects, and I've got a couple of different kinds of effects. I've got animations, so if I want to, I can choose float, and I could say, well, let's see, let's find something here fast backwards. So here it floats backwards, or fast forward. Before, I created the text manually that came zooming out from the screen. Well, here I could go to the Effects tab and add the float effects to it and have it happen automatically. If I apply that, now my Effects tab, or my Effects area, has some settings, and I can change the settings of that effect. So another way to learn how this works is just throw some effects on and deconstruct it and play with it and see how it affects your text. Let me take that effect off, go back to the library here. If you want to get a little more information, you can choose the Styles tab. And in the Styles tab, sorry, not the styles, that's what we've been working with, the Templates tab. If you add a template, these are more robust than styles. So if you really want to find out how things work, add a template and then go to the Style tab and see what they've done there. Go to the Effects tab, see if they've done anything there. Go to the Transitions tab and see if they've done anything there. And notice that down in the timeline area, when you add an effect or a transition, all of that stuff shows up on the paragraph indicator down here in the timeline so that you can see exactly what you've done. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier when we were talking about this area down here, in addition to reordering them like we did earlier, we can resize these paragraphs just like you do with an event in the timeline of Vegas Pro. You can resize a paragraph and make it last longer or shorter or whatever you want to do. So the templates is a great place to just add a template, and in this particular template didn't use an effect, it did use a transition, and we could check the styles and so forth. So some real helpful ways, a real helpful way of finding out exactly what's going on is by adding the styles and templates and just deconstructing them to find out how it was built. The one thing I didn't mention was the transitions, so we can talk about those for a second. The transitions, you can see here they've got a wiggle transition already applied. The transitions just change the way things enter and leave the screen. So in this case, they've got this wiggle transition applied there. And if we go back to the attributes and check the transitions, we see that we have two transitions. One of them is the end and one is the beginning. If I take the end one or the beginning one away, now we've just got the end one. Now by default, when you add a transition from the library, and I'll just choose, let's see, fast left, and drop it onto the paragraph, by default it shows it as a transition in, but I can just drag it over and make it a transition out. So now it'll wiggle and fly off at the same time. Okay, so that's a quick run through the library. What did I not talk about? I didn't talk about shapes. We can add shapes to our project as well. So we can either add shapes right to the text box. If we have the paragraph selected and I add a shape, I can add an ellipse or a rectangle. It adds it as a character in the box. If I have nothing selected and I add a shape, and again, I can add it from here or I can add it from up here. And these have some custom presets to them. Let's just take this one. If I add that, it adds it as its own paragraph, and you can see that the paragraph is down here. Here's the shape paragraph, and the enter text paragraph that we had earlier. Once I've got a shape selected like this, I can use it just like I manipulated the text. I can do that with this. So if I wanted to add some rotation to it, or maybe some Y rotation, and if I go to the Styles tab and see that I've got a 3D face and a 3D outline, maybe I can add more extrusion to that 3D outline. And you can't really see it here because it's black, but if you look in the video preview window, you can see the extrusion over there. If I change the color to something else, you'll see it. Let's try this beautiful color. So there you see the extrusion. I've got other outlines and the 3D face. I could, just like I did earlier, I can add maybe another 3D outline. And let's make it thicker. There it is. And use the layer depth to push it back and so forth. So just the same kinds of things that I was doing with the text, I can do with these shapes. And that gives me the ability to now add graphical elements to my project, either as backgrounds for the lower thirds or just as shapes in my video if I want a particular shape in my video for some reason. So there's a lot of flexibility, a lot of things that you can do there. All right, so I've gone about 5 minutes over. Let's get back to the PowerPoint here just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Let me zoom back out so you can see the whole thing. Right, so we have a webinar promotion going on as we normally do. Now this promotion has actually been going on since we released Vegas Pro 11, and today happens to be the last day of the promotion. So if you want to take advantage of this, today's the day to do it. You can upgrade from a previous version of Vegas Pro for only $149.95 US, and you can upgrade from any version of Movie Studio for $299.95. Or you can purchase a new copy of Vegas Pro 11 for $599.95. So again, that promotion ends today, so now's the time to take advantage of it. All right, that brings us to the question and answer portion of the program here. And so Whitney is over there. She's been monitoring your chat questions. So Whitney, you got anything for me here?
We do have a few questions today. The first one is, how did you turn keyframing on?
How did I turn keyframing on? Let's go back to the computer and I'll show you how I turned keyframing on. When you are working with a piece of text, and let's zoom in on this again so you can see it a little bit better. Grab this. The box to turn, the checkbox to turn keyframing on is in the Objects area of the Attributes tab. So click the Objects area, and then you've got all the object controls, and there's the box, the checkbox for turning keyframe on. Just click it to select it, and now you can add new keyframes, change your position here, add a new keyframe, switch back and forth between the keyframes that you want to use, and so forth. So just select the Turn On Keyframing checkbox.
Great. Can you create your own textures and bring them into NewBlue Titler Pro?
Absolutely, you can. If we go to the Style tab, and let's go to the Texture box here, and if we double click, you can see that we've got all these JPEG textures, but the Titler Pro supports all these different types of still image files. So PNG, JPEG, a couple different JPEG flavors, bitmap, Targa, and so forth. So any still image file that you create in those formats can be brought in. So you would just navigate to your custom artwork using this dialog box like you would normally navigate in Windows, and choose your custom artwork and bring it in. Yep.
So to clarify another question that we had, you can only bring in still images, you can't bring in video files and use those as textures.
That's right. It has to be still images of these formats. Yep.
Can you add different styles to different letters within the paragraph?
Oh, you know what? I've never tried that, but I'm going to guess that you can. So let's clean this out and just add a new text element here, and we'll find out real quick. So right now I've got, if I go to my Style tab, I've got a control for that whole block, and I've just turned it red. Let's make this bigger so you can see it. If I come in and select just the T, can I add a different texture to that? And the answer is yes. So yeah, good question. Something I'd never thought about and tried before. But that's one of the cool things that I've been finding with this tool, is that there's so many different things like that that you don't think of immediately that you can discover by just playing around with it. And like I said, adding the styles and the templates and just deconstructing what they've done to see, to learn new tricks.
Similarly to that last question, can you extrude individual characters?
Yep. So I've got my T here, and I'm going to rotate it for you so that you can see the results of any extrusion that I add to it. Let me move my view over just a little bit so you can see, you can more effectively see the video preview window, because I think that's where you really kind of see this better. So here's my T. I've rotated it in both the X and the Y axis. And now if I come over and extrude that face, there we go. So yeah, so I could take every letter and twist it differently and extrude it differently and give it a different texture, and really make a hodgepodge if I wanted to.
Great. Will NewBlue always be included with Vegas Pro 11, or is it only for a promotional period?
It's always part of Vegas Pro 11. Yep.
Okay. Does NewBlue Titler Pro come with the upgrade package, or can you talk about, does it come, can you use it with Vegas Pro 9, and if not, does it come automatically if you upgrade from 9 to Pro 11?
Okay, so it does come with both the new purchase of Vegas Pro, and it does also come with an upgrade purchase of Vegas Pro 11. I know for sure that it works also in Vegas Pro 10. I've never tried it in 9. I don't see why it wouldn't work in Vegas Pro 9, but I can't say for sure that it does because I've never tried it.
Okay. Can you use NewBlue Titler Pro as a standalone application?
Not the version that comes with Vegas Pro 11. Whether NewBlue sells a standalone version of the Titler Pro or not, I don't know the answer to that question. But the version that comes with Vegas Pro 11 is a plugin that you cannot use as a standalone.
Can you show us how to extend the length in time beyond the 5 or 10 second default for the title?
Yeah, just like any other media generator in Vegas Pro, let's see, how am I going to show you this? Let's just close this for a moment. The length of the generated media is going to be dependent on how long the event is, for one thing. So here I've created the event. By default, the event comes in as 10 seconds, and so the media generator is 10 seconds. And so the text will last for 10 seconds. In this case, if I have a piece of static text, just extending the event that holds that text will extend the length of the text. However, if I have a text that has some keyframing and some motion on it, then it gets a little bit more complicated, but this is still no different than any other media generator in Vegas Pro. But let's take a look at what would happen if I turned keyframing on, and I created a keyframe where my first keyframe, this was small, and in my second keyframe, let's add another keyframe and make it big. So at keyframe 1, whoops, sorry. So here at keyframe 1, and then at keyframe 2, I'll make it big. And so now I have this little animation happening. And it happens, okay? So if I go back to my timeline and I play this, you see the animation happening. And as it gets to the end of the natural 10-second length, it's going to start over, right? Because Vegas Pro loops it when I extend the length of the event in the timeline. So all I need to do here then is to come up, and this is standard for any media generator, and just match the length of my media generator, which you can see right now is 10 seconds over here, to the length of my event, the event that holds it. So if I click that, you can see now that the duration is now 20 seconds. And I now have, if I zoom out here, I now have a 20-second timeline. I can make this longer, and now the animation happens over 20 seconds instead of 10 seconds. So kind of a couple different answers to that question. If it's static text, just make your event longer, and nobody will be the wiser. If it's text that has animation, you're going to have to match the length of the media generator to the event. Looks like we have time for maybe one more.
Okay, the last question is it possible to make the text change from one color to another during a keyframe animation?
Is it possible to make... okay, so okay, I see what you're asking. The answer to that question is not in this version of NewBlue Titler Pro, at least not in a straightforward way where you'd set a keyframe and change the color here. Now you could add any of the color effects in like a hue saturation adjust effect in Vegas Pro, add that to the event and change that color over time. That would then change the color of the text. But in this version of NewBlue Titler Pro, I don't have keyframing capabilities on the colors and the attributes on the Style tab. Those keyframing abilities are only on the Object tab. Okay, wow, lots of good questions. We got through a bunch of them. So that's the NewBlue Titler Pro, and hopefully my bad graphic design skills aside, hopefully you learned something about how you can use the outlines, the faces, the 3D extrusion, the blurring, and all the effects and so forth that we talked about in the Titler to create interesting graphical titles and elements for your projects. As usual, we're going to archive this presentation. Now, we had that little stream glitch at the beginning of the presentation where after about 10 minutes in, we lost our stream. Hopefully, we still have that piece of the presentation and we can put it all together and give you the whole thing. But certainly the last portion we'll have available for viewing on demand on our website with all our other webinars probably within 2 weeks. We'll also take all the questions that you sent us, the ones that we didn't get to answering today, and work up answers for all of those questions and post those to the website. That typically takes a little longer than 2 weeks because usually we have quite a few questions to answer, and it takes some time to get through those. But hopefully you've got a good handle now on how the NewBlue Titler Pro works inside Vegas Pro 11. Hope you're excited about it because it's a lot of fun. As you can see, hopefully from what we did here, there's a lot you can do with it. So until next time, have fun with the NewBlue Titler Pro and Vegas Pro 11, and we'll see you then. So long.